I remember the room was silent except for the hum of my computer fans, yet inside my chest it felt like a drumline. My palms were slick, the mouse warm in my hand. I watched the candlesticks bleed down the screen, each red bar erasing not just money, but pieces of my confidence. I had convinced myself this trade was the one. It had to come back. It had to. The market didn't care. I clicked refresh again, even though the numbers updated automatically. $2,300. Mane $3,800. My stomach knotted. My heartbeat stuttered. I told myself to wait. I told myself the dip was temporary, that smart money would step in and rescue me. My brain whispered lies while my body pulsed with panic. I was losing to myself long before the market finished me off. Hours earlier, I had woken up like any other day, filled with the electric anticipation of opportunity. I brewed coffee, scrolled through social media feeds, scanning for patterns, hype, and whispers of quick riches. Everyone seemed so certain. Charts flooded my screen. Comments screamed, "Next leg up, easy money, don't miss this run." I felt the familiar tug of fear and desire. I wasn't studying the market. I was chasing belonging. By the time I pressed the buy button, my pulse already raced. I didn't enter a trade. I entered a story in my head. A story where I was the one who finally caught the big move, the one who would screenshot my profits and feel like a genius. The first green candles reinforced the illusion. My chest expanded with each tick upward. I wasn't just making money. I was feeding something deeper, something primal that had been waiting for recognition. Then the reversal began. A single red candle looked harmless at first, almost like a pause before the next rally. I watched without breathing. Another red candle followed, then another. My profit shrank to nothing. Logic left the room, replaced by a desperate cocktail of denial and hope. My hands trembled as I hovered over the sell button but didn't click. I whispered to myself, "It'll come back." The market kept falling. A cascade of red swallowed my screen. In that moment, it felt like the market saw me, targeted me, wanted me broken. I imagined some invisible hand reaching into my account, extracting not just cash, but dignity. My vision tunneled. I barely noticed I was leaning forward, nose almost against the glass, as if getting closer would change the outcome. When the loss hit $7,000, my chest collapsed. I stared at the number, frozen. It didn't feel real. My body went numb, a hollow ache spreading from my gut to my fingertips. My inner voice shifted from hopeful to brutal. How could you be so stupid? Why did you believe this time was different? Shame settled in like a heavy fog. I couldn't tell if I wanted to scream or disappear. I closed the trading window, but the loss burned behind my eyelids. I opened it again, as if it might magically reverse. I checked forums, desperate to find someone saying it would recover. I wasn't reading for truth. I was hunting for permission to keep lying to myself. No one could give it. The market had already given the verdict. I walked to the kitchen and stood there, staring at the counter without seeing it. My coffee was cold. My chest felt tight, my thoughts loud and scattered. I replayed the moment I clicked buy. I replayed every chance I had to exit. I replayed the number $7,000 like a broken alarm bell. It wasn't just a trade I lost. It was a piece of identity. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought emerged. The market wasn't against me. It wasn't alive. It wasn't even aware. The only predator in the room had been my own mind. The candles weren't red with malice. They were red with indifference. That realization didn't erase the loss, but it cracked open a window of clarity. I wasn't fighting charts. I was fighting impulses wired into my brain long before I ever opened a trading app. I sat back down at my desk and stared at my reflection in the dark border of the monitor. My face looked drawn, my eyes heavy. I saw fear, greed, and denial staring back at me. It hit me that the market is a mirror, not a map. I had been searching for direction, for certainty, for some external signal to make me feel safe. But all I found were reflections of my own impatience, my own illusions. That night, I didn't sleep well. My dreams were a mess of numbers and flashing red. I woke up before sunrise, scrolling through my phone in the dark, chasing reassurance that didn't exist. I read articles, watched videos, and tried to piece together excuses. But the quiet truth stayed lodged in my chest. I didn't lose to the market. I lost to myself. As dawn filtered through the blinds, a strange calm crept in. Painful, but clarifying. I realized that if I wanted to survive, I had to change not my strategy first, but my identity. The person who clicked buy yesterday couldn't be the same person who sat here now. I needed to learn how to see my own brain clearly before I could ever hope to see the market clearly. The market doesn't care if I win or lose. It only reflects the parts of me I haven't mastered yet. That is where this story begins. The first lesson etched into me that day was the brutal truth that pain leaves fingerprints on every decision. Every tick of the market pressed on that bruise in my mind. I noticed that even before the next trade, my thoughts were not about analysis or logic. They were about relief. I wanted relief from shame, from the emptiness of watching my balance shrink. That hunger for relief is the first trap, the invisible leash that algorithms and professionals know how to tug. When I opened my charts again, I could feel my breathing shorten. The market wasn't even moving violently, yet my body reacted as if a predator lurked behind the screen. This was the moment I began to understand the first of what I would later call the 7 deadly trader signals. The pain anchor. The pain of a previous loss doesn't stay in the past. It stains the present. It whispers, get it back, fix it now. Prove you're not the fool you feel like. I didn't need an external enemy. My own memory was the snare. Days blurred into each other after that initial collapse. I would wake early, promising discipline. Yet by midday, I was hovering over another position, fingers itching. I wanted redemption in a single move. I told myself I was patient, that I would wait for the perfect setup, but the market only needed to twitch in my favor for me to leap. This is where the round number hypnosis took hold. A stock approaching exactly $100 felt magnetic. My eyes glued to the chart as if that number had divine significance. My heart believed that price would respect me, that it would bounce as if scripted to soothe my ego. But numbers have no loyalty. I remember watching a chart touch a round level like $50 and imagining the invisible army of traders thinking the same thought. This is the line. This is where it turns. What I didn't see was the algorithm patiently waiting to harvest our hope. A sudden dip triggered a cascade of stop losses, mine included, and within seconds, the market snapped back up, without me. I sat there stunned, angry at the market, but beneath that anger was the sour taste of recognition. I was not trading a system. I was trading my psychology. It wasn't just pain and numbers. My own biology betrayed me in subtler ways. There was a moment, one quiet morning, where I logged in and saw a small green profit. My brain lit up. It wasn't even significant money, but it felt like a tiny victory, like someone finally acknowledged me. Dopamine surged, warm and addictive, whispering, "Do it again." I realized that the market had turned me into its lab rat, pressing the lever for unpredictable rewards. This was the biochemical trap, the second layer of the game I hadn't known I was playing. Every red candle that followed those little wins felt sharper. Losses carried a weight that crushed me faster than gains could lift me. I read somewhere that the pain of loss is more than twice as powerful as the pleasure of gain, and I didn't need a study to confirm it. My own nights of restless pacing were proof enough. This imbalance twisted my decision-making. I would hold losers too long and cut winners too fast, a dance of self-sabotage orchestrated by my nervous system. The worst part wasn't the individual mistakes. It was the story I started to tell myself. I believed I was cursed, that the market watched me personally. I imagined that every time I entered a trade, some giant hand moved the price against me. It sounds absurd in the light of logic, but in the heat of emotion, it felt real. I was living inside the mass hallucination, where traders collectively project patterns and narratives onto random movements. I saw head and shoulders where there were none, triangles in the chaos, meaning in the noise. My brain wanted order, and the market fed me illusions. There was a day when a meme stock exploded on social media. Everyone was buying. Screenshots of gains flooded the internet. Friends texted me, "You in?" My hands shook as I hovered over the buy button, even as my gut whispered that I was chasing smoke. The signal was clear. Everyone's buying. I should too. That last nudge into FOMO felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with a crowd chanting behind me. I jumped. By the time I landed, the crowd had moved on, and I was alone with the fall. What struck me hardest in those moments was the isolation. No one was there when I stared at my account in the early hours. Seeing another drop, another red wound. People talk about the thrill of trading, the freedom, the independence. They don't talk about the mirror it holds up to the weakest parts of your psyche. I realized that each loss was not just a subtraction of money, but an exposure of my blind spots. The market didn't hate me. It simply reflected me. That reflection was merciless. It showed me that my triggers were predictable, my emotions exploitable, and my habits visible to anyone with the tools to see patterns at scale. The professionals didn't need to know my name. They only needed to know that traders like me flinch the same way, run toward the same bait, and hesitate at the same cliff edges. I was not a unique snowflake in the market storm. I was a statistic. It was in that realization that a seed of transformation began to form. I understood that surviving this game wasn't about predicting the next candle or memorizing another pattern. It was about stepping out of the mirror and finally seeing myself clearly. Before I could outthink the market, I had to outgrow the version of me that the market so easily manipulated. The turning point didn't arrive in a flash of brilliance. It crept in quietly like the soft light before dawn. I sat in the same chair, staring at the same screens, but something in my chest felt heavier and clearer at once. I realized that all the patterns I was obsessing over weren't in the market, they were in me. I saw my own habits repeating like loops. The twitch before placing a revenge trade, the shallow breath when a round number approached, the surge of hope that preceded every disaster. I started writing. At first, it wasn't a plan, it was desperation. I opened a blank document and typed the number of my last loss. Then I wrote how it felt, where it landed in my body, and which thought had whispered me into the trade. Line by line, I emptied the noise out of my head. I didn't know it yet, but I was building my first mirror of truth. The act of journaling wasn't just record keeping, it was a confrontation. On paper, the excuses looked smaller. The lies I told myself dissolved under the light of written words. Through this mirror, I began to see the 7 deadly trader signals for what they were. Not market traps, but mental scripts. The pain anchor whispered, "Get it back now." The round number hypnosis said, "This level will save you." The mass hallucination promised, "Everyone is right, follow the herd." I traced each loss back to one of these voices, and the pattern was unmistakable. I was fighting ghosts I had built myself. Yet even as I gained awareness, temptation never truly left. Awareness doesn't erase craving. It only lights it up. There were mornings when I felt disciplined, promising myself no impulsive moves, and by afternoon, a single chart would pull me toward the same cliff edge. My hand would hover over the mouse, my body leaning forward as if the extra inches would give me control. I could feel the old neural pathways firing, the dopamine itch asking for just one more trade to soothe the unease. That's when I experimented with the second ritual that would become part of my survival, the pre-mortem protocol. Before any trade, I forced myself to imagine it failing in 10 different ways. I pictured the spike that grabs my entry, then dives. I saw the sudden news headline that flips sentiment. I imagined my own panic, my finger hovering to move the stop loss, my chest tight as the market punished hesitation. By rehearsing the pain, I took away some of its surprise. My brain hated it at first. It wanted the fantasy of the perfect win, not the rehearsal of disaster. But repetition carved a new habit. With these small changes, my trading slowed down. Not in execution speed, but in inner pace. I watched more and clicked less. I began to notice how silence felt in my room when I wasn't chasing every flicker on the chart. It was almost unbearable at first, like withdrawal from a drug. That's when I discovered the profitable art of nothing. Doing nothing wasn't laziness. It was discipline in its purest form. The market will always dangle action as bait, but patience is the predator that waits. One afternoon, I sat with charts open and coffee cooling beside me. A setup formed, one that fit my system's rules, one that had the structure I had promised myself I would follow. My pulse rose, but my hands didn't shake. I entered the trade, and this time I didn't stare like a desperate passenger. I followed the plan. The stop loss stayed where it belonged. The exit triggered as designed. Profit came, not as a rush, but as a quiet nod to discipline. I felt something better than excitement. I felt alignment. That small win didn't change my account balance much, but it began to change me. I saw the proof that I could act without being dragged by my older self. I understood that identity in trading isn't a title you claim. It's a behavior you repeat until the market recognizes a different pattern in you. I wasn't fully transformed, but the mirror reflected a new outline. The journey was still lonely. Screens don't clap for your discipline. Social media doesn't celebrate your decision to sit out a tempting setup. But I started to realize that real victories in this game are invisible first. They happen in the space between thought and action, in the pause where your old self lunges, but your new self waits. I began to frame my entire approach around identity rather than outcome. Instead of asking, will this trade make money? I asked, is this what the disciplined version of me would do? That single reframing saved me from countless unnecessary losses. It became a quiet mantra, guiding me away from old cliffs. I remember the first time I closed a trade according to plan and felt nothing. No thrill, no rush, no despair, just the quiet click of execution and the soft exhale of discipline. It was strange, almost unsettling. For so long, my trading life had been a storm of emotion, and now there was just calm water. That was when I understood that real transformation isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in the absence of chaos. The old me would have celebrated every win like a lottery ticket and mourned every loss like a personal attack. The new me started to see each trade as a line in a long story rather than a final chapter. My identity shifted from hunter to guardian. I wasn't hunting for thrills anymore. I was guarding capital, guarding focus, guarding the fragile structure of a system that could outlive my moods. To protect that new identity, I had to construct what I now call the system fortress. It wasn't made of bricks or screens. It was made of rules. 1% risk per trade. Stop loss never moved. No trade outside of defined hours. These weren't just technical decisions. They were acts of self-defense. Every rule was a wall between my rational mind and the ambush of emotion. Building that fortress exposed how fragile I had been before. My old self would improvise under pressure, convinced I could outthink fear and greed in real time. But the market doesn't wait for improvisation. It punishes hesitation and rewards preparation. By the time your pulse is racing, it's already too late. I learned to make decisions when calm and obey them when afraid. Even with the fortress, the temptations still came. A sudden breakout on social media, a friend texting me a sure thing, a flash of greed when I saw someone else's screenshot of a massive gain. Each time, the old voice whispered, just this once. Each time I felt the tug of the mass hallucination, that strange sense that safety lies in numbers, that the crowd can't be wrong. But the crowd is often just a mirror reflecting panic and euphoria at scale. I began to notice patterns in my body as clearly as I once watched patterns on the chart. My shoulders would tense before my hand even moved. My breathing would shift before my brain admitted I was about to chase. Recognizing these signals became as important as recognizing any candle formation. The market's mirror showed me the chart of my own nervous system. There were still losses, of course. A fortress doesn't make you invincible, it makes you survivable. But each loss inside the rules felt different. It was clean, almost sterile. No shame, no spiral, just a data point for the journal. I could feel the slow rewiring of my brain. Loss without panic, gain without euphoria. In that neutral zone, the market finally became a partner instead of a predator. Then came the longest week of waiting I had ever endured. My system required a specific setup, and the market refused to provide it. I opened the charts each morning, saw nothing, and closed them again. At first, it was agony. My fingers twitched. My mind invented reasons to bend the rules. But I didn't. I waited. On the fifth day, the setup appeared like a patient reward. I executed the plan flawlessly and closed with a modest gain. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the proof that I could exist in that space of nothingness without self-destruction. That was the profitable art of nothing in action. Doing nothing felt like doing everything, because it was an act of self-control that old me could never manage. By now, my reflection in the market had changed. I could sense it in the rhythm of my days. Fewer screens open, fewer trades, more pauses. When I looked at my journal, I didn't just see numbers. I saw the slow construction of a new identity. Every disciplined action was a brick. Every avoided impulse was cement. I was no longer building trades. I was building myself. Still, the final transformation required one more shift, the identity revolution. I had to stop thinking of myself as a trader chasing wins and start living as a protector of capital and executor of process. It was less glamorous, but it was liberating. When I embraced that role, the market stopped feeling like an opponent. It became a field where I simply showed up, followed my rituals, and left when the work was done. One evening, I closed my laptop and noticed the sun had set without my awareness. My account had grown modestly, but my mind felt lighter than it had in years. I realized that I no longer measured success by the size of a single trade. I measured it by the absence of chaos in my head. The market hadn't changed, but the mirror now reflected someone I could trust. The quiet victories began to compound, not in my account first, but in my mind. Every day that I followed my system without breaking, every moment I resisted the twitch of old habits, a layer of confidence settled over me. It wasn't the loud, reckless confidence I once carried when I believed I could outsmart the market. It was the quiet certainty that came from alignment between intention and action. I started to notice how my life outside the screen began to mirror this new state. Mornings felt less frantic. I woke up without the urgent need to check my phone for overnight moves. My coffee tasted stronger, my breathing slower. I was no longer racing the market for a sense of identity. I was building one brick by brick, away from the flashing red and green lights that used to dictate my mood. The journal became my daily ritual. Each entry was more than a record. It was a conversation with the only opponent that ever mattered, myself. I wrote down the trades I didn't take and celebrated them as victories. I described the moments my hand hovered over the mouse but stopped because the setup wasn't right. I could see my evolution in ink. Fewer words of panic, more words of patience. But the market never stops testing. One afternoon, news hit the wires. A sudden surge in a stock I had traded months ago. The chart exploded upward, green candle after green candle, and social media roared. Screenshots of instant profits flooded my feed. For a brief moment, my chest tightened and I felt the ghost of my old self stir. That whisper came back. Everyone's buying. Don't miss it. I stared at the screen, watched the candles climb, and felt the pull of the mass hallucination trying to drag me back into the storm. My mouse hovered. My breath shortened. But then I remembered the fortress, the mirror, and the silence I had built. I pushed my chair back. I let the chart run without me. And for the first time, I felt stronger for doing nothing. Later that evening, I checked the chart. The spike had collapsed into a brutal red cascade, trapping all the impulsive entries in its shadow. Old me would have been among them, staring at a fresh wound, inventing excuses. New me sat in the calm of a missed disaster, and that calm was worth more than any fleeting gain. This was the true meaning of transformation. It wasn't about never losing money. It was about no longer losing to myself. The market had become a teacher instead of a tormentor. Each day I sat down, I knew exactly what my role was: execute my process, protect my capital, and leave when the work was done. I began to embrace the identity of a system executor, a capital guardian. My emotions didn't vanish, but they became background noise instead of marching orders. Fear whispered, greed tempted, but I no longer obeyed. I saw them for what they were: old echoes bouncing in a new, sturdier mind. One day, I watched a perfect setup form according to my rules. I entered the trade with the same calm I once envied in others. The market moved in my favor, and my target hit. Profit appeared in my account, modest but clean. I closed the trade and leaned back, letting the moment sink in. There was no rush of dopamine, no hunger for another hit. There was only the quiet satisfaction of execution done right. In that moment, I realized I was no longer chasing the market for validation. I was meeting it as an equal, unshaken by its noise. The mirror it held up to me no longer reflected panic or desperation. It reflected patience, discipline, and a mind finally aligned with its purpose. And it rarely feels heroic in the moment. I learned that true progress in trading often looks like boredom to the outside world. There were weeks when my friends asked if I was even trading anymore because I stopped sharing screenshots or talking about wild moves. I smiled and let them think I was inactive, knowing that every day I resisted the pull of noise. I was winning in a way they couldn't see. My journal became a map of mental evolution. The early pages were frantic, full of exclamation marks, curses, and desperate rationalizations. As the weeks passed, my entries became steady, almost meditative. No trade, setup not met, felt the itch at 11:42 a.m., did nothing. Those words carried a weight that numbers never could. Every avoided impulse was a deposit into a different kind of account, an account of trust in myself. The market still tried to seduce me. Flash crashes, pump candles, and sudden hype storms passed like baited hooks. One afternoon, I watched a cryptocurrency spike on breaking news. My phone buzzed with messages. Get in now! I watched it climb, feeling my heart rate rise. The memory of old me appeared like a ghost, leaning forward, mouse trembling. But my new self leaned back, hands folded, waiting for the market to finish its dance without me. The candle reversed violently, slicing down through the entry that temptation had whispered. I didn't move. I simply watched and exhaled, calm washing over me like a tide. That evening, I wrote a single line in my journal. Patience paid more than profit today. That line marked the first time I truly felt free from the invisible leash of urgency. Freedom in trading doesn't come from a massive win. It comes from no longer being chained to the impulse to act when action isn't required. This realization bled into the rest of my life. I became slower to react, quicker to observe. I felt less need to explain myself to others because I had finally begun to trust the quiet rhythm of my own process. One Saturday morning, I reviewed my journal from the first day I had written down that $7,000 loss. I traced the arc from chaos to clarity, from flinching at every tick to sitting still in the face of flashing temptation. It struck me that the market had always been the same. Candles rose and fell, news erupted and faded, crowds panicked and cheered. The only thing that had changed was the person in the chair. I began to see my trading desk as a dojo, a place where I trained my mind rather than chased wealth. Each session was less about hunting opportunity and more about practicing stillness under pressure. The monitors became mirrors reflecting my own development. Even losses within the system became lessons instead of wounds. One particular trade stands out in my memory. My setup appeared late in the afternoon. I entered calmly, knowing my stop and target were fixed. Almost immediately, the trade moved against me and hit my stop loss. I felt a flicker of disappointment, but no panic. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. By the time I returned, the market had moved in wild swings, but none of it touched me. I had executed perfectly. I felt a quiet pride stronger than any past adrenaline high. That night, I realized something profound. The market is not where I go to win money anymore. It's where I go to confront myself. Profits are a byproduct of that confrontation, not the prize. The real prize is walking away with my identity intact, knowing that I didn't break the rules, didn't betray my own discipline. As this mindset settled into my bones, I felt lighter. The old narrative of chasing, grasping, and hoping had dissolved. In its place was a steady hum of purpose. My trading was no longer a gamble. It was a practice, a ritual of self-mastery performed under the cold, indifferent gaze of the market. Eventually, I stopped measuring progress by the size of my profits and started measuring it by the distance between my impulses and my actions. That space, the space where emotion once ruled, had become a sanctuary. It was the space where I could pause, observe, and choose. I no longer needed to feel right all the time. I didn't need to catch every move or anticipate every breakout. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. What I needed was to protect the version of myself that I had worked so hard to rebuild. And that meant honoring the process, not the outcome. There was a time when I believed trading was about domination, outsmarting others, beating the market, winning fast, and winning big. But the deeper I went, the more I realized trading is not a conquest. It's a mirror. It reflects who you are under stress, under pressure, under temptation. And if you're willing to look closely enough, it can show you the parts of yourself that need healing. I saw how deeply tied my sense of self-worth had once been to my account balance. How one green day could inflate me, and one red candle could unravel my confidence. I saw how I used the market to feel alive, to distract myself from other areas of life where I felt powerless or unseen. And once I saw those patterns, I could no longer pretend that trading was just about money. One morning, I entered a trade and hit my stop. It was a loss I had accepted in advance. I closed the chart, stretched my back, and smiled. That smile was small, but it was everything. It was a sign that I had finally crossed into a new identity. Not the gambler, not the hopeful dreamer, but the executor of a personal code. This identity shift didn't make me rich overnight, but it gave me something more valuable. Stability, consistency. peace. And from that state, I began to grow. Not in leaps, not in surges, but in steady, upward curves like a healthy equity line. The more I honored this identity, the less I needed external validation. I stopped chasing wins to post. I stopped explaining trades to people who weren't on the path. I found joy in the silence of my process, in the ritual of reviewing charts, journaling thoughts, executing with discipline, and stepping away without drama. The temptation to deviate never fully disappeared, but I learned how to sit with it without surrendering. And in doing so, I became something rare in this industry: calm, measured, unmoved by the hysteria of crowds. I realized that most traders fail, not because they lack intelligence, but because they never build an identity strong enough to withstand uncertainty. They come to the market with shaky frameworks and fragile egos. And the market, brutal and beautiful as it is, exposes every crack. But if you build the foundation first, if you face your weaknesses head on, if you name your demons and discipline your actions, you start to gain something the market cannot take away. You gain control over yourself. That control becomes your edge. Not a strategy, not an indicator, but an identity. Patient, structured, unshaken. As the months passed, I found myself trading less, winning more, and thinking clearer. I no longer needed chaos to feel engaged. I found fulfillment in watching without chasing, in acting only when the time was right, in accepting that sometimes the best trade is no trade at all. This wasn't a breakthrough. It was a becoming. And I had become someone I could finally trust in front of the screen. I sat at my desk one evening with the monitors glowing in the dim light. The room was quiet, but inside, I felt an unmistakable steadiness. I realized this was the culmination of every silent victory, every resisted impulse, every moment I had stared into the mirror of the market and chosen discipline over desire. I opened my journal to the first page, the one where I had written that raw $7,000 loss months ago. I traced the words with my finger and felt the echo of that pain. But it was no longer sharp. It was distant, like an old scar that no longer ruled me. That loss had been my teacher, the doorway to everything I had built since. I thought about the old version of me, the frantic trader chasing dopamine, clinging to round numbers, moving stops in panic, believing the market was hunting me personally. I thought about the fear, the late-night pacing, the way my identity rose and fell with every candle. And then I looked at the new version of me, calm, deliberate, structured, a guardian of capital instead of a gambler of hope. This is the identity revolution that the market demands. It doesn't care about your dreams or your excuses. It only reflects what you bring to it. If you bring fear, it will amplify it. If you bring greed, it will expose it. If you bring patience, it will eventually reward it. Not always in profit, but always in growth. I closed my eyes and imagined the market as a vast, silent ocean. Storms would always come. Waves would always rise and fall. But I was no longer the fragile boat tossed without anchor. I had become the captain of a sturdier vessel, one built on process, patience, and self-knowledge. The final lesson came not from a win or a loss, but from a moment of pure stillness. I watched a setup appear, perfect according to my rules. I entered the trade with clarity. It moved in my favor, then against me, then back again. My heart stayed steady. The outcome didn't define me anymore. When the trade closed for a modest gain, I smiled, not because of the money, but because I had proven to myself once more that I could remain unshaken. This is the true victory in trading, mastering yourself. The profits follow, but they are only the echo of an inner transformation. I no longer needed to chase the market for validation. I no longer needed to feel alive through risk and chaos. I felt alive in the quiet certainty that I could trust myself under pressure. As I finished that day's journal entry, I wrote a single sentence that captured my journey. The market is a mirror, and I finally liked the reflection. I leaned back, let the glow of the screens fade into the background, and felt a deep sense of closure. I had entered this world searching for money, for excitement, for proof that I was capable. I found something far greater, the ability to see myself without illusion. From that day forward, every trade became a ceremony, every session a meditation. And I knew that no matter what the market threw at me, losses, volatility, temptation, I had built the one thing that couldn't be taken away, a mind I could trust.